Hello and welcome to Red's Business and Technology Podcast. I'm your host, Jackson Barnes.
I'm your co-host, Brad Ferris.
And today we're sitting down with Sara Harrup, who's currently the CEO at Foodbank Queensland, chair of Executive Connection, the non-executive director of ETC, member of Urban Utilities, and non-executive director at Healthcare Insurance. That was a bit of a mouthful, Sara. Looking forward to getting your insights today as you transition from your early in career from being a registered nurse to journalist and then CEO and now advising a whole bunch of boards. So thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start with your background, so what you did way back before and how you got to where you are now.
Yeah, so I have a meandering, exploring background. So I started out, I went to uni to study journalism and was dreadful at it and failed. So stopped that, became a registered nurse, did that for 7 years and then took a sidestep into the insurance industry. So utilised all the medical skills in working in kind of long tail claims. And then I ended up working for NRMA, and then you just, start, I guess, rising into different roles.
Corporate life.
Yep. Loved it. And then after I had kids, sort of decided to head into not-for-profit. So I went to work for a medical college in rural and remote medicine. So I guess that the thread has always been kind of health, well-being, and then, as I started to head into CEO roles, it kind of doesn't matter what your industry is or area of expertise is. You just can take the same skill set and apply it anywhere. But fundamentally, I'm about, doing something that feels purposeful.
So how did you go and climb up that corporate ladder back when you were down at NRMA, I guess, and then what you learned and now how you got to a non-for-profit? You didn't start as a CEO as a non-profit straight away? No,
I was a senior manager when I went into the not-for-profit world. And look, it was a bit of a shock for me, having come from a lovely corporate life with whole departments that do things for you into a small not-for-profit where you're the marketing department, you're the IT department, you're kind of everything. Yeah, and now I've forgotten your question. What was your question?
No, that's I was just saying how you, I guess, went through the ranks.
How did I go through the ranks?
Which you might get some of that insight, I guess, in the latter questions. So let's start off with what's the secret sauce that you've discovered over the years from how to run a successful non-for-profit organisation?
In some ways, I think it's not too different to the secret sauce for any organisation, that you're still operating in the same world and the same environment as every other organisation. So it's actually about taking a commercial view, but at the same time, you're obviously working for some sort of social purpose. So it's keeping that sort of front and centre in terms of, why are we doing this and is this helping us achieve our mission or our vision? But in terms of then the how you get there, you've really got to be as commercial as any other organisation. So I think secret sauce is always values driven and get experts. And whether that's experts on your team or you're procuring expertise in, you've got to have good expertise and knowledge within the organisation.
Yeah, it's probably not too dissimilar to any other business, but I guess most businesses are out to make money, I guess, is the core difference, but how you run things is the exact same. And we'll touch on wearing many hats and risk being one of those things, and cyber risk is something that we talk about a lot on here. So let's pivot there. So how are non-profit boards looking at cybersecurity now with all the recent breaches that happened late last year, and then just this last week, Black and White Cabs had a breach, and there's a lot going on in that space. How are non-profit boards, which you sit on a fair few, looking at cyber risk?
I think it depends on which board it is. So, some not-for-profit boards are in highly regulated sectors, either by, APRA or, other government regulators, and they actually have pretty solid requirements on how people are, boosting their security posture. I think by and large, everybody's got awareness. I think the things boards are still struggling with is there's a lot of, you'll hear directors go, I'm not technical. I don't know where to start. So it's around how do you actually translate what is essentially a risk like any other risk in the organisation into a question for the board around what questions do we need to be asking, how do we get assurance that the treatment plans are in place for that risk, and how do we also even set risk appetite around this? And also, I think the other thing that probably there's still some learning for boards is just around if you're going from being an organisation that's got a pretty low maturity score, it takes time, and particularly if you're not-for-profit and you're not flush with resources and you don't have internal IT capability, you've got to co-opt that. It's actually going to take time. There's often not quick fixes to these things, and while you're taking the time to build capability, you're still vulnerable.
So what's your advice for other people who run non-for-profits around that? Just to seek help from professionals externally, just I guess invest into cyber tools or hire an internal person. What would you advise?
Look, it might sound transactional, but I kind of think that the starting place for boards of organisations that perhaps don't have a lot of maturity in the space is you need external assurance. There really is, like, your internal people can tell you anything they like, but you get an added layer of assurance by having an independent external organisation actually come and assess where you're at and benchmark you and then tell you where's your gap. Because the other thing too is that we often there's a role for independent assessment in everything that we do. We can be in the depths of something and think we're doing fine, and then someone else comes with a set of fresh eyes and that's what they're doing all day, every day, and go, actually, you've got some big gaps. So I think that's a great starting point, and no doubt boards will then be confronted with a maturity score potentially a lot less than what they thought it would be, but at least then there's a starting point. Yeah. And you know what the gap is, and you can ask questions around in what order are we going to address these issues and what are our risks while we're doing that.
Yeah, that's definitely something that we advise, is to get a third-party audit from a cybersecurity business, whether it's a full penetration test or something smaller and aligned to some frameworks if you're not regulated by a body. So that's good advice. What is the importance of technology in a not-for-profit business?
Oh, it's huge. It's an enabler. I mean, it's the way we all transact with the world generally now. And I see it as an enabler, and also really good technology, like really good software can actually drive good process. Like, there used to be a bit of rhetoric around to say, the software is not going to do anything for you if your processes are terrible, and, it won't change that. But in fact, some pieces of software now are actually so good that they can actually really drive good practice. So definitely, I think it doesn't. I think one of the mistakes sometimes not-for-profits make is, if we digitally transform, it's going to save us money. And that's not the reason to digitally transform. It's going to make you more efficient. It's going to improve your customer experience, or your, depending on your structure, whoever your service users are, it's going to improve their experience. It's going to give you better insights into your impact on what you do. It may not save you money, and in fact, it may cost you more money, because when you deploy technology, you need to have people to kind of oversee that. It's not, you can't just release it and then no one's looking after it. So, I think I've seen that a fair bit where boards think that it will save money.
Yep. No, that's good advice, and I think you definitely hit the nail on the head there around digital transformation or going digital. It might be some efficiency, but the customer experience is generally enhanced by having the right tool set and processes with technology as well.
Look, I'm glad you framed it that way, because quite often we hear that as well, and it's really about adding value to the process. You'll probably save your money by not losing your money in the future, by potentially losing business, losing customers, customer experience, etc. There's going to be a cost. You're improving, you're adding new things, you're improving your toolkit, and you've got to pay for that, but you'll get more productivity out of it in the end.
Do you want to give an example of something you've done with technology in the past to improve customer experience?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about Foodbank Queensland, and we're just at the tail end of doing it right now. So introduced a new ERP system, and, that piece of technology has been great, but it's actually caused us to redesign every process pretty much in the organisation. So it's taken us to a model where, people can shop on a web store. It's essentially a click and collect model. So for our members, so they are frontline charities who are members of Foodbank, it has reduced their waiting times and their turnaround times. It's increased visibility around product and allowed them to be more streamlined in what product they take back to their organisations, and it's also given us huge amounts of insight into inventory control and the way we work and what we consider to be a warehouse at capacity. It's been really transformational, not without bumps, but really transformational.
That's awesome. So who drove that internally for you? So who kind of came up with the concept and said, what we're doing now needs to go digital? Was that yourself or was that someone else in the business?
No, it was me. And it was interesting because we are part of a federated structure, so there are other food banks in other states. And so the other states had all adopted an ERP system years ago. And for some reason, because Queensland often likes to do, just generally speaking, what they like to do. Notice that in every organisation I've been in. But for some reason, Queensland hadn't. And I think it might have been fear-based. I'm not sure, but it was before my time. And look, one of the just the huge burden that I saw when I got there was that just this burden of Excel spreadsheets and paper and also questions that should have an answer that couldn't be answered, and just the level of frustration that caused. And particularly, during COVID, like we were able to, it's quite amazing that we were able to mobilise to do what we did during COVID. So we packed at a second site, 38,000 odd hampers and distributed them to the front line. But doing that without an ERP and visual on where everything was and where it was going to was really hard. So we started down a path of looking at the ERP system that was in use in other states. We did a bit of a discovery process, discovered that we thought that probably wasn't the future for us, and that was a big decision to make. And then we went to market to see what was out there.
So you did a discovery process on what you were currently doing with spreadsheets and paper, no doubt.
Yeah, and looking at if we adopted the system in use by other states, would that meet our needs? And we kind of went, it might, but we felt like we should take a broader look.
Yep.
And that was, when I say scary, it was scary from a cost perspective, if nothing else. And also scary from the perspective that we had no internal IT capability really. So we had to co-opt that capability, and, in some ways we learnt as we went. And we did the right things. We got a good steering committee together, and there were people on that steering committee who, had implemented enormous ERP systems for, some of the major retailers in the country. So we had help and support, and then we just worked out what are the steps.
Yeah,
you just have to know what the steps are, even if you don't know, exactly what you're doing. You just got to go through the steps.
So when did you start that journey?
I feel like that was probably mid to late 2020.
Cool. And then you said would you say it's done now?
So we went live in stages. So we went live on the inventory side in August last year, and we went completely live on the customer side at the beginning of February.
So about better part of 3 years.
Not long ago.
Better part of 3 years.
Yeah. It's a long process, right?
Was it worth it?
Oh, absolutely.
Yep.
Even for, like anything, the time was longer than we thought it would be or wanted it to be. The cost was a bit more than we wanted it to be. But we were always quite driven. And it was interesting because by the time we were getting towards the end, it was our people at the coalface that were just like, can we just get on? And our COO, we were being very careful about the change management, and he made this awesome statement one day. He said, we can sit here and scenario plan and play war games around what might happen, what could happen, how would we manage it, or we can actually decide we're going to press go and we can find out what the real issues are. Yeah. And he's not kamikaze, he's pretty conservative, but we were potentially, we're quite conservative and just wanting to make sure that we didn't have something that blew up.
Yeah.
So we pressed go.
Yeah, that's awesome. We have had a lot of people in that seat right there talking about driving innovation internally and getting to like a minimum viable product as a first kind of test, and then enhancing later from there. Because if you don't just essentially turn it on and start, you never get there.
Correct.
So that's definitely good advice. What advice would you have for other not-for-profits who are struggling to wrap their head around the, I guess, dollars involved and the enormity of rolling out an ERP system?
Look, I think it's around, write it down, write a business case. You should be anyway if you're going to put it to a board. And you need to cost it properly, which is, the total cost it's going to cost you over, whether it's 5 years or whatever you choose, and the total cost to you in terms of your internal resources and everything. So I think, you can naively go in thinking it's just, it's the cost of the software and any hardware and, and build in a good contingency, because there was a bunch of stuff that we had to kind of rebuild in our infrastructure that we probably didn't anticipate having to rebuild.
Yep.
I think it's also making the case for, what happens if you don't?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, what happens if you're 12 months, 2 years down the track and you have not evolved? Like, not-for-profits still need to be competitive, and I don't mean competitive with each other or with anybody, but they need to be viable and sustainable and current and be offering services that are within normal market expectations. Like, that's just the reality of the world. So if you don't transform, you'll probably find yourself at some point in time not viable, or a startup will come and suddenly you may not be required to service those people anymore.
Yeah. You mentioned that the rest of the food bank organisations around the country had already gone down a digital transformation path. How far behind them were you?
Oh, look, I think it's probably a good at least 5 years or more behind them.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I don't know exactly, but I think their adoption of it was quite a long time ago.
Do you think you benefited from that, or maybe left it a bit too late, or left it a bit too late?
No, well, look, I think we benefited from it with the benefit of hindsight, only from the perspective that we could have ended up with a legacy system and then had to
do it all over again.
And do it all over again, yeah. So that would be the only.
Okay.
But look, how do you know that?
Yeah. And I mean, I think you did the right thing, but I can also understand from the board level and in your shoes the hard situation you're faced with, because ERP is a massive thing to change. And in what you do at Foodbank, you're essentially that dollars could be used on getting food to people who need it in Queensland, I assume, right? So you've essentially got to temporarily give less to future, have a better service and stay viable.
Yep.
So,
and I think the benefit of us, and look, other states are also transforming as well. Like, the other states have always been a little bit ahead of Foodbank Queensland in some ways in terms of their sort of general transformation and progressiveness, but we've caught up, which is great.
Awesome.
It was amazing.
And gone ahead of them?
No,
you think?
No. I don't think so. I think we're all. It's a wonderful network, and we're all now really building from each other. And so one of the great things about us and other states also transition to another piece of another program for the ERP is that we get to be the test cases. And so some states will find that perhaps what we're using, it just doesn't suit their needs, and so but we all learn from our experiences.
Yep.
Because we're not all operating the same model as well. So we are, whilst we're a network and we're all servicing people in need, the models are not identical from state to state.
So pivoting a little bit to, I guess, separate to choosing the right system and looking internally at what processes and what trying to digitise and building a business case, how do you find, with all your years of wisdom, like sitting on boards and trying to find the right IT partner, how do you find the right technology partner as a non-profit?
Well, there's probably two answers. There's how would I do it now with the benefit of experience, and how might I have done it, I don't know, 10 years ago, very different. I think one of the things when you're in a smaller not-for-profit or, maybe early in your CEO career, you generally don't have procurement policies, and so it doesn't drive you to necessarily run through really rigorous processes. So certainly I can think of examples from my career where it's mainly been a relationship-based thing, and the best procurement process you can kind of do to see what's out there in the market, and often, costs. Sometimes, I've worked as a CEO for a not-for-profit that just had no money. It was smell of oily rag stuff. And so it's the partner you want versus the partner you can afford.
Yeah.
But now what I would do, really, the way we operate now at Foodbank, we have a procurement process, and we actually, as a part of that, it's not only around looking at capability and the offering and value for money, but it's also around values alignment. So I have seen in my career the undoing of partnerships when you come to a point where the values or the fit's just not quite right.
Yep.
And that may not happen straight away. Sometimes when you partner with people for a long time, you can drift. And then if you haven't talked enough or looked after the relationship enough, you can find that you're no longer on the same page.
Yep.
But I do think it's something that particularly at Foodbank we do now, when looking at who we partner with, there's a real kind of values alignment and fit piece to what we look at.
Yeah, so with that, you would go to a business and say, what are your core values? Is that what you would do?
No, not necessarily. I mean, they might put that in an RFP.
Yeah.
No, it's around the discussions that we have with them. Because the thing is, values is just culture walking and talking, right? So you don't even need to ask. You can see it, you can feel it.
Yep.
If an organisation actually does live by their values, it's not hard to tell.
Yeah.
It comes, it oozes out like
Yep.
it's, so it's that. And I mean, you might call it an X factor, but it's kind of not. Like you can tell. It's when you're in a meeting and that partner leaves the room and you look to each other and go, we are in good hands.
Yeah,
like
okay.
and we're aligned and we're thinking in similar ways about things.
Yeah.
And it's a good fit because it's also too around, there can be some amazing IT companies out there, but they're so sophisticated and so used to working with really large organisations that it's almost like a tsunami over a small not-for-profit and you'd struggle. So it's also about the ability of that partner to translate the work that they're doing into something that's in digestible bites for a not-for-profit who may not have a big IT department.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think you're right. You've got to get a right kind of fit partner.
Yeah.
There's no point to a business with 50 employees going with an IT company that's like thousands and thousands of employees. Doesn't make any sense. That X factor and culture is interesting. Though.
Yeah.
Appreciate you sharing that kind of. And also when you said cost as well, I think you're right there. Like, especially with technology, I'm a little bit biased here, but when you're trying to select a technology partner, costs, from what I've seen, people don't really care that much about. It's more about that value and right fit and feel. Whereas if you try and just go the cheapest option with a technology partner, the impact to the business because you've tried to save $100 a month or something, you really there's no ROI there. You go backwards a long way.
Well, what is that saying? It's not my saying, but cost is only an issue in the absence of value, right?
Yeah.
So and that's why people don't start to get upset about how much they're paying for something until they start to get a perception that they're not getting any value from it.
Yeah.
And it's like you might have been happy paying that 12 months ago, but now you're not.
Yeah. Well, that's true. Things do change.
Yeah.
The economy's being. You've got a pretty impressive CV in terms of what you do now. What keeps you motivated?
Good question. I am really interested in the potential of everything, the potential of people and the potential of communities, potential of organisations, and I'm interested in the legacy that we leave. So that's what keeps me motivated. I'm interested in, I've been very fortunate to have some fantastic mentors and coaches throughout my career that have given me a great gift, and I feel like I want to share that. Yeah, to help other people leave a legacy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Good
That
feedback.
sounds quite deep, doesn't it?
No, it does, but that's good. Brad, any questions you got?
So how many not-for-profits now?
In terms of boards or Well, I've just got a fourth come on, so it'll be 4 shortly.
Yeah. It's taken a lot. No,
there could be more coming too, but that's okay. If I don't have a day job, then that is my job, the portfolio. And I'm very interested in the board space.
Okay.
Maybe in a disruptive way.
So would you say that governance, risk and compliance is also a related area of interest then?
It is. However, the caveat on that is that we've got to remember that the flip side of risk is opportunity. So I do think that we can get very bogged in risk, but then not actually consider what the opportunities are as well. So yes, and it's interesting. I keep ending up when you're on a board. When you're on a board, you always have to participate in a committee. And what I keep saying to the boards I'm on, I'd just love to be on a nom and rems or something to do with people, but I keep ending up on audit and risk, finance. So anyway, look, that's where people think I can be helpful.
and it is kind of the role of the board, right? Like
absolutely.
Risk and opportunity,
Yep.
and how do you balance that? How do you put the process in place to achieve both at the same time? So, that's cool.
Yeah. Well, I think we'll wrap up there. It's conscious of the time. But before we do, what's next for you, Sara?
Yeah, so as you know, I'm finishing up with Foodbank Queensland at the end of April, and so they'll enter an exciting new chapter with an awesome new CEO. Don't know who that is yet, but they will be. And for me, it'll be a portfolio career. So board roles. I do a bit of executive coaching, and I'd like to do more of that because it's a very special thing to do. And I also chair a group through the Executive Connection, and I'd like to build that group a little bit more. We'd like a few more members in that group.
Exciting. Exciting to see where your career goes and
thank you.
how that changes. So thanks for coming in, Sara. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.